Hello, and welcome to the Smart RV Podcast. Episode 4. I'm John Vanek. I'm a certified RV tech based out of Douglas County, Nevada, which is northern Nevada, about an hour south of Reno and about a half hour from South Lake Tahoe. And I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Symmes. How you doing, Joe?
Hey, great, John. Glad to be back with you, coming to you live, pre-recorded from the great state of Mississippi. So we cover the country, both the west and east, and different times of the year, different temperatures. We love to banter about the weather. Our audience loves it too. Feedback has been great.
Well, here we are, and we're going to jump right into it. We always start off with our Beside the pedestal. Tips and tricks for everybody, whether you are a new member of the RV community, still learning about things, maybe you are highly experienced, maybe you've forgotten some of these things, or you've never heard of them, or you've heard them before. They're good reminders. But, when you're beside the pedestal and you're plugged in, hopefully you have good power and good water and all that good stuff. So, Joe, what is your beside the pedestal tip this week?
John, as viewers know, I love being beside the pedestal. That means you're camping and life is good. Like you said, beside the pedestal, with full hookups, you're no problem. You got all your utilities, got your resources, everything is great. But that may be the best time to take a look at that tire pressure. We've had a few customers, each of us, a few incidences lately. My informal survey says summertime is harder on tires than other times of the year. So it's a good August tip to take a look at those tires. And specifically what I'm going to focus on is maintaining tire pressure. You're going to want to check the tire pressure. A lot of tires will say on the side, cold pressure, hot pressure, whatever. When you're camping, you're obviously going to be at cold pressure. If you're side of the road, just got done with your slog down the highway, 80 miles an hour for hours on end, you would be looking at the hot pressure then. So the rule of thumb is you want to be within 10 psi of what the RV manufacturer, not necessarily the tire manufacturer, says. And that can be found on the data plate on the side of your RV. On a lot of towed rigs, it's on the street side or driver side near the front, outside usually. And on motorhomes, it's generally somewhere around the driver's seat. So same thing at the front, driver's side, street side, but on the inside.
Like on the edge of the door, like on the edge of the door frame where you would typically find your VIN number?
If it's a Class C type, then yes, exactly. That's where it'll be in the original manufacturer door frames. If you're driving a Ford E450 chassis, very popular on a lot of the smaller Class Cs, it'll be in the door frame there. If it's a big Class A motorhome, usually it would be on a data plate somewhere near the driver's seat, just on the wall itself.
So do you have a preference for a recommendation for type of tire pressure tool?
Great question. The tire pressure gauges come in all shapes and sizes. Through the years, I've bought pretty cheap ones. I've got a couple pretty high-end ones. To be completely honest, not a huge difference. I think what you're buying when you spend more on a better quality tire gauge is longevity. I've had a couple cheap ones, and if you drop them once, that's kind of the end of them. The higher end ones are a little more durable, but most come the day you buy them, calibrated pretty well and work pretty nicely. So I believe for me personally, the dial ones are a little easier to read, but the stick type are fine. They're easier to fit in a toolbox or a glove box or something like that. Just make sure the one tip on those, when you put tire pressure on and the stick comes out the end, that it's not a spring return on most of those. That it's showing you the pressure. So when we go from one tire to the next, be sure and push it back in again.
Push it all the way back in and start fresh. So also when looking at tires, my tip of the week is understanding your date code and how to read your date code. And typically on the sidewall of your tire, you're going to find kind of an oval and you're going to find 4 numbers. And those 4 numbers are referencing the week and the year that the tire was manufactured. So for instance, if it said 2025, that tire was manufactured in the 20th week of 2025. If the number was 4722, it was the 47th week of 2022. And most of us don't pay attention to our date code on our automobile tires because we drive them enough, we're paying attention to tread wear, and that's when we tend to replace our automobile tires is based on tread wear. But RVs, because they don't travel as much as our vehicles typically, the date becomes very important. And most of us should be buying new tires based on age of the tire versus the miles we've put on the tires. And you're going to get, different opinions on this. But having talked with a lot of tire professionals who are also RVers, most of them recommend, if they're in the industry, they also get a better deal on tires. So maybe it helps them out. I know a couple of guys, they change them every 3 years. But certainly I think 3, 4, maybe 5 years at the most would be the maximum. You're looking for not just the date, but also for wear on the sidewalls, if you're getting little micro cracks. These are all things that are indicative of the tires drying out, and they can lead to catastrophic failure. But if you don't know the date and the age of your tires, the thing to do is to go look for the date code, and there can be, again, 4-digit number. The first 2 numbers are the week of the year, and the last 2 are the year that the tire was manufactured. Any thoughts or more to add on that, Joe?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research on this, John. I had customers asking this question over the years. And to reiterate a couple things you said, you're spot on. I take the extreme example, full-time RVers. The tires, they can't ever wear them out, it seems. RV tires will always age out before they wear out. And different research has shown different things. Different safety groups have different advice. But in general, the advice I give my customers is kind of on the upper end of what you were saying there. 5 years, maybe everything being great, you could push to 7, but that's about the most. I think National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration recommends somewhere in that same range. So the point is, RV tires are going to age out before they wear out. And to kind of head off some of the questions that inevitably come in, yes, you should cover them, prevent UV exposure. That helps, especially if you're camping somewhere for a long time or the RV is facing one direction and the south side tires are getting a lot of sun, something like that. However, the age thing that we're talking about is just due to ozone exposure and general rubber deteriorating. So unless you've got them in vacuum sealed bags, they are being exposed to ozone. And that's why it doesn't matter nearly as much as when you bought them. It matters when they were made because they basically start deteriorating the day they come off of the line from the factory.
That's a good point because I know someone, client who had recently bought some tires and the tires were 6 months old when they were installed on their RV. My standard is 4 years. Is every 4 years, new tires are going on, regardless of how much I've traveled. It's it's just not worth it to push it for me. I actually very early in my RVing lifetime had a blowout on our fifth wheel, and it was on a narrow mountain highway.
Oh, no.
We were lucky. There was there was some damage to the J-wrap, which is the bottom part of the body on the side of an RV. That's called the J-wrap. There was some damage there. Didn't have any wiring damage. Luckily, nobody was hurt. It was actually kind of a positive experience, and some great people pulled over and had the tire changed out in record time with some help from just some nice guys on the highway.
Nice.
But that was my lesson. And those tires were only 3 years old. They were the tires that came on the rig originally. There is a term out there called the China bomb, which may make reference to any inexpensively made tire. After that, I replaced all my tires with name brand tires and have changed every 4 years since. Just the risk to my safety, my wife, my dog's safety, the safety of other people on the roads. It's just not worth it for me to try and eke out every last mile. Even though tires are expensive, it's just not worth the downside to me.
Yeah, what I tell my customers is when you get new tires and you've got them on and everything is great, go ahead and start putting away a little right then, that day, start putting away a little bit of money off to the side. Get your piggy bank out and deposit a couple dollars every chance you get so that when the inevitable comes, a few years pass, you've got a tire savings built up and it's not financially unfeasible.
There you go. There you go. So I want to move on to the call of the week. And the call I want to share was actually a call from a client who said he could smell propane and thought he had a propane leak. And he thought it was coming from the regulator on his tanks. And so I went out there and I carry a digital gas detector. I also carry the traditional bubble spray so we can spray on fittings looking for leaks in LP line. And the interesting thing was that the
What what
regulator,
what about a
oh,
lighter, John? Customer wanted me to check for a leak with a lighter one time. Is that a good
that
idea?
might work once. Yeah, not a good idea. Yeah, if you have, I guess we should have our safety warning here. If you ever think you have an LP leak, first thing you should do is shut off all your LP sources.
Mhm.
Okay. If you think it's somewhere in the tanks, disconnect the tanks. Call an RV tech or take it into an RV shop right away. I mean, we can't be messing around with propane, and unfortunately. All kidding aside, earlier this summer there was a very tragic incident um, on the East Coast, I believe, of the United States, but it was
Mhm.
somewhere back east, and where a couple of RVers lost their lives because a fire started, and the report was that they were using an open flame trying to find the source of an LP leak, and it ignited a fire, and they were not able to get out of the rig in time to survive. So, these are serious things. So in this case, what was interesting is that he had two tanks. He's living in it full time. Two tanks are side by side, and one tank was completely empty, and the other tank was just just filled. And so he was concerned because he heard this kind of a high whining sound when he opened up the tanks. And came to realize after diagnosing things is that and he'd actually replaced the regulator. So the regulator was new. I think we ended up with this whining as there was trying to be some, not equalization, but there was some passage of propane coming out of the full tank and trying to make its way into the empty tank, which it really shouldn't be doing. But if you jiggle the knob on the regulator itself that points to whatever tank it's an auto changeover regulator. It's pointing at the tank that you should be using. But it created this quiet, but a kind of a high whine. And we checked everything and there was no leak. So I think this was just a sound internally in the regulator that was going, and it lasted for about 10 minutes and then it went away. Meanwhile, in that 10 minutes while it was going away, I was using my digital LP tester and following the lines from the LP tanks all the way down the coach. And eventually, we actually did find an LP leak at the valve fitting going into a recently installed tankless water heater system. And boy, the tool I was using was phenomenal. I had it on a high setting to start and trying to pick up everything we could and opened up an access door, which is where this fitting was located. And right away it sounded and kind of had to keep the door open and blow some air through because it was just picking up the whole compartment. I reduced the sensitivity and we let the LP that was leaking out to get out of the compartment there and eventually drove right down to the valve. And as soon as I put a wrench on the valve to tighten up the flare fitting between the valve, there was an on-off valve, and the fitting going into the water heater itself, boom, it went away and the sound went away, the leak went away, triple checked it, both with the electronic tester and also with bubble spray, tested everything else with the bubble spray. solve the issue there. So it was kind of interesting. We started out at one point thinking there was an issue there, and there really wasn't. But we found the issue later on down the line. So in this case, because he suspected he had a leak, we that's what drove us to check everything. But maybe that's something that a lot of RVers should have done on occasion is have their whole system checked out with preferably an electronic detector. They're much easier to get into tight spaces, and that way you can check the entire line all the way through the rig. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that story. LP is nothing to mess around with. Uh, you can also, but speaking of checks and kind of preventive maintenance, can have a certified tech do a propane leak drop test. And that's another good kind of preventative measure where effectively what we do is pressurize the system and then turn it off, bleed it down just a little bit so it's not at max pressure anymore, and then put a very sensitive pressure gauge known as a manometer on the system and measure if it's continuing to drop, or obviously all the seals are tight and the valves are closed and you're maintaining pressure for a few minutes. Or the reason for the bleed down is if it's leaking by the regulator and pressure actually increases. So a certified tech can do a LP drop test and check to see if pressure is rising or falling. And that's a great, again, non-destructive way to test the system to see how well it's holding.
Because when we're doing those, we're usually tapping into the gas line. The cooktop is probably the easiest place to tap into, but there are others. But yeah, you bring up a good point, and I think if I recall, the industry itself, I believe, recommends a time pressure drop test either annually or every 2 years, just as a general safety function, if I recollect that correctly.
Yeah, I believe so. It's one of those as often as you can, since it doesn't do any damage to the system, doesn't even use any propane really. The more frequent, the better. But yeah, you're right. That's an excellent annual, semi-annual thing to put on your maintenance checklist.
And it's also important. This is a tip maybe for the other technicians that are watching today. It's always a good reminder. I always remind myself whenever I'm looking at anything to do with the LP system, if I'm going to be opening up the LP for any reason, like last week I had to replace a water heater, so I had to disconnect the LP. Always a good idea to run your time pressure drop test with your manometer before you touch any of the LP systems to verify that you do not have a leak before you start disassembling things and reattaching things. So you want to have a good solid drop test before and then repeating the drop test afterward. And so as an RV owner, if you're having someone coming out to replace or work on any of your appliances that use LP, you should be expecting that also. You want to make sure that you had a good solid system, a tight system with no leaks before and after any work is done by a certified RV tech.
Yeah, excellent point. That's always a good idea.
So what was your call of the week?
So, yeah, I had interesting call this week, kind of moving on off LP to another energy source, batteries. So I had a customer with a motorhome, and his call and complaint was, I've got it stored at my storage facility at my house beside my garage here, and I've got my rig plugged in, but my batteries are going dead. And I thought, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
So deploy to the call to see what's really going on here. Come to find out, in his particular rig, yes, he had it plugged into shore power, which was providing, he actually had a real nice 30 amp riser set up. So he had 30 amp input to the rig, and that was powering the converter charger. So it was producing, taking the AC voltage and making DC, charging the coach batteries, because that's what they're hooked to, and was able to run his DC loads while it was plugged in. But what was the battery that he was had issues with was the chassis battery, and it was not being charged by the converter charger.
Ah.
And so he had a phantom draw, a parasitic load on the chassis battery. So even though it was plugged in and parked, we actually determined it was the steps, the automatic steps and the light on them that was drawing down the chassis batteries hooked to that side.
Because this
So
was a Class C. This was a Class C RV, correct?
no, this was on a Ford F-53 gas Class A chassis.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Great. Okay.
So I was able to replace his battery for him because once the battery was completely dead, there was no bringing it back anymore. Would not hold a charge. So replaced his battery, new battery. But to prevent the problem from happening again in the future, what I did is installed a battery disconnect switch right on the battery itself. So he can now, in addition to kind of pushing the relay switch at the door, a lot of motorhomes have, that disconnects the chassis batteries. He now has a switch on his chassis battery itself to disconnect it. And then I suggested and was able to source for him a smart charger. It's a trickle charger plugged into another AC power source, and can the reason they call them smart chargers is because they trickle charge millivolts at a time, keeping a battery charged up. But they're called smart chargers because they actually measure the charge in the battery and go into a float mode, a desulfate mode, kind of a maintenance mode, things like that. And so they're made for long-term use. They can stay on a battery indefinitely and just keep it topped off and without overcharging fears. So now he has chargers for 2 different battery banks, 2 different 12-volt systems, and 2 different chargers and 2 different disconnects for each of those systems. So he's now set. But my point for our listeners out there is don't neglect your chassis batteries. A lot of times we think of house batteries and there's multiple of those, and we want to make sure they're charged and disconnected when not in use, things like that. But just realize your chassis battery may be not integrated in that same system.
And so that brings up an interesting point, Joe. And you have a lot of experience dealing with electricity and electronics. And correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't believe it's easy to say that every model of RV, when we're talking about the same model, or certainly different models, are wired the same. And it seems that from my experience and other techs' experience, when we're looking at some of these electrical issues, we're having to dive into that specific rig at that specific time, right? We can't just say all pick your brand, pick your models are the same. And these can be challenges. And if we got to dig through it and sort it out, that's where most RV owners don't always understand exactly how the electrical systems are working in their rigs. Is that correct? Would you agree with me?
I do. Excellent point. There can be variations across product lines. I swear sometimes within a line, sometimes there'll be variations. No 2 RVs ever seem to be the same. So they're not nearly as standardized of an industry as maybe automotive industry or boating industry or something like that people are familiar with. And kind of reference back to one of the tips we gave, I think one of our first couple episodes, when customers call up a tech, you can't necessarily just say, oh, I have a X year Y model, and the tech doesn't necessarily have then any kind of reference to say, oh, you must have this kind of refrigerator, water heater, furnace, whatnot, because there's so much variation. And same thing in the manufacturer's defense, they have such wide lines and very different models, styles, colors, floor plans, years. There's lots of changes that occur. And so configuration management, to put it in more industrial term, is not super precise across RV lines.
Well, these are all things that bring us back to the importance for individual RV owners to know as much as they can about their particular RV. And whenever we're talking about understanding how our RVs work, it brings us to one of my favorite segments of the show, our tool time segment.
I love the tool time segment.
Yeah, well, we all love tools to start, but you got to have some tools to to do some of the simplest things. And where do we start? So we've got a couple real simple tools today, but I'm going to start off with some examples of the simplest, perhaps. And the first is, and this is, it doesn't really matter the brand. It happens to be Milwaukee, but it tells us on back it's an 11-in-1 screwdriver. And so you've got different size tips, both standard and Phillips. Pieces are flying. It comes
you don't want to
different...
lose any of the parts to it.
You don't want to lose any of the parts. We've got some Roberson, number 1 and 2. Those are square bits. The little fittings give us different sizes to grab. Hex head screws. So rather than having like 11 screwdrivers, something like this is probably about $10 or $11. For maybe $1 more, you can go with like a Klein, which is an 11-in-1. So it's also the same, essentially the same design. One of my favorite tools, this is also a Klein. This is a 15-in-1, but it's a ratchet. So I can set it so it's easier to, if I'm tightening screws, and then it has a much bigger assortment of screws that all nest in the back here, including some torque screws and some different variations on our Phillips and square bits. But a screwdriver is critical to be in any rig. I think in a previous episode, I mentioned like one of my favorite tools is a flashlight. With a flashlight and a screwdriver, you're off to a good start. Joe, what are you throwing out for our tool time this week? I guess another pretty basic tool, but important.
Before I go there, since you brought up screwdrivers, I just want to point out those multi-style like you have. Here is a off-brand, but just a real basic. This is about a 6-in-1 because it has a removable body just like you were showing, and just a couple different ends that can be swapped out, or a nut driver. So you can even have these multi-screwdrivers down at a pretty low level also. But my basic, just get you started tool of the week is a good pair of pliers. A lot of people have regular slip joint pliers, maybe some basic just round the house pliers. But for RV work, I would highly recommend in your little RV toolkit is a good set of needle nose pliers. They make extremely long ones. They make short ones. They make very fine ones. All of the above are good. I don't think needle nose never get a ton of force on them. So this is one of those that I'm always a believer in good quality tools will last you a lifetime. But to be completely honest, even a low end off brand needle nose can be just what you need to get that little screw that fell down between the floor and the cabinet or something, and get things out of tight places, which you'll often find on an RV. So a couple basic tools for us.
I know in my tool bag, I have an older and less expensive 6-inch needle nose plier.
Mm-hmm.
I have a newer and better quality 8-inch needle nose plier, and then which is the one I use 9 times out of 10. But what I also have, and this is maybe more of a tech tool for technicians, but I have 11-inch bent nose needle nose pliers, and those things are awesome when you drop something and there's a lot of things you just can't get into. And working on RVs, whether you're a member of the RV community, owning an RV, or you're an RV tech, access to things in the RV is always the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Always the biggest challenge.
Yeah, most things are relatively easy to fix once you get to it.
Yeah. In fact, I just posted to a group that we're affiliated with that I think the RV industry needs to start developing a scoring system like for gymnastics, right? Where you have different scores for different elements, or diving, right? And I think there has to be a score for technical difficulty and then a score for physical challenge. And it seems like a whole lot of work we get, the technical difficulty is maybe in the 3 or a 4 range, but the physical difficulty is in the 9 to 10 range. And so anyway, a lot of the tools we carry are just tools that make access to these problems easier for us. So
maybe that should be one of our viewers' discretion items when you hire a tech. If you know the project is going to involve a lot of twisting and turning and unusual contortions, maybe look for a tech that might be suited for such work.
Maybe a tech younger than us. Maybe not.
We're
both in pretty good shape. We both work out regularly. So anyway, with that, I think that kind of wraps up today's episode, Joe. Any final words?
I think excellent, kind of a back to the basics episode, and really appreciate all of our viewers and listeners. And remember, if you want to drop us a line, the easy way to remember to contact us is to send an email to contactus@smart-rv.com.
And that'll be in the show notes. Well, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week at the Smart RV Podcast. Take care. Safe travels.